Have you ever heard the name Bayano? For many, this African hero remains a hidden figure, overshadowed by better-known icons of resistance. But once you learn his story, you'll never forget him. Bayano's legacy is one of unbreakable courage, strategic brilliance, and a refusal to submit to the crushing weight of 16th-century colonial power. He was a man who knew the meaning of freedom in a world built on enslavement, and he was willing to risk everything to claim it. Not just for himself, but for all those who suffered alongside him. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into Bayano's life, unraveling the circumstances that led him from West Africa to the jungles of Panama, and exploring how his steadfast rebellion became one of the most significant expressions of resistance in the history of the African diaspora. By the end, you'll see why his name still resonates with so many people today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this from the corners of history you may never have known existed. The Transatlantic Slave Trade, a world in chains. To fully appreciate Bayano's journey, we must first understand the landscape of the transatlantic slave trade. This brutal system began in the early 16th century, although smaller-scale enslavement of Africans by Europeans had been underway even earlier. Driven by the insatiable demand for labor in the New World, European powers, particularly the Spanish, Portuguese, British, French, and Dutch, were constantly seeking enslaved Africans to work in mines, plantations, and infrastructure projects. West Africa was a major hunting ground for these slave raids. European traders often colluded with local rulers or warlords, buying captives from internal conflicts and raids. But there were also outright kidnappings where armed groups tore through villages, taking people against their will. Once captured, men, women, and children were dragged onto ships and crammed into the lower decks for what is now known as the Middle Passage, an unimaginably harrowing journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Many died from diseases, malnourishment, and abuse before ever setting foot on the shores of the Americas. Those who survived the journey were often met with grueling labor conditions in the colonies. The Spanish Empire, in particular, had ambitious plans to exploit the resources of the Americas, from gold mines to sugar plantations, and depended heavily on the forced labor of enslaved Africans to realize these plans. It was into this perilous world that Bayano was thrust, a world where human lives were commodities and cruelty was the bedrock of a booming global economy. Bayano's captivity and arrival in Panama. Born in West Africa, Bayano found himself ensnared in the chaos unleashed by these relentless slave raids. Though we may never know every detail of his early life, many historical sources indicate that he was captured during a European-led raid or conflict. From this moment on, Bayano's fate was in the hands of slave traders who saw him as nothing more than a profit margin. Eventually, Bayano was sold, likely multiple times, and transported to Panama. During the 16th century, Panama was under Spanish colonial rule, an essential transit hub for goods traveling between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. With the prized route across the isthmus, Panama was a focal point of Spanish colonial ambitions, linking the riches of Peru's silver mines to European markets. This strategic importance demanded a relentless labor force to maintain roads, fortifications, and ports, and to manage the constant flow of valuable cargo. Bayano entered this environment as an enslaved man. However, he distinguished himself quickly through his leadership qualities and a fearless spirit that refused to be broken. The conditions he and his fellow captives endured were harsh, to say the least. They were forced to toil under brutal overseers, laboring long hours under the sweltering heat. Many died from exhaustion, disease, or the merciless punishments inflicted by Spanish authorities determined to keep a tight grip on their human property. Yet Bayano and many others did not accept their circumstances as fixed. He saw an opportunity to seize control of his destiny, and in doing so, he became a beacon of hope for those who shared his yearning for freedom. Breaking the chains. The Great Escape. Bayano soon spearheaded one of the most remarkable acts of resistance in the history of colonial Panama. He rallied enslaved Africans, fueling in them the belief that their chains could indeed be broken. Together, they staged a mass escape into the treacherous jungles of the isthmus. But this was no impulse. It was a carefully coordinated plan that leveraged the Spanish Empire's own Achilles heel, Panama's challenging terrain. The group of escapees established what came to be known as a palenque, a fortified settlement hidden deep within the forests. Such maroon communities were not unique to Panama. They existed in various forms throughout the Americas, wherever enslaved people banded together to carve out islands of freedom. These enclaves were incredibly difficult for colonial forces to penetrate, thanks to the environment's natural defenses and the Maroons' intimate knowledge of the land. For the Spanish, these independent settlements were dangerous. Not only did they represent a clear rejection of colonial authority, but they also served as a rallying cry for other enslaved Africans who might be inspired to flee. If too many people followed in Bayano's footsteps, the entire colonial labor system would be at risk. Bayano's Palenque became a sanctuary, a place where enslaved Africans could reunite with family, forge new bonds, and live life on their own terms. Here, they were no longer subjects of Spanish rule. They were free men and women, shaping their destiny under Bayano's guiding leadership. Guerrilla warfare in the jungle. What set Bayano apart from many other rebels was not just the fact that he organized a successful escape, but also the sophisticated tactics he deployed against the Spanish. From his jungle stronghold, Bayano orchestrated raids on Spanish settlements and trade routes, targeting caravans loaded with gold and silver. These actions struck at the heart of the colonial economy, sending shockwaves through the Spanish authorities who relied heavily on the wealth extracted from the region. Bayano's forces understood the terrain intimately. They used stealth, speed, and surprise attacks to their advantage. Spanish soldiers, weighed down by their armor and unfamiliar with the jungle, found themselves at a serious disadvantage. It wasn't merely about physical confrontation, it was psychological warfare. Each successful raid fueled fear among the Spanish colonists and inspired more enslaved people to consider rebellion as a viable path to freedom. Moreover, Bayano's Palenque wasn't an isolated community. It served as a central hub that communicated and traded with other Maroon communities scattered throughout the region. This informal network of liberated settlements exchanged information, resources, and often collaborated to safeguard one another against Spanish retaliation. In a time before modern communication, these alliances were forged through runners, coded signals, and strong intercommunal ties built on solidarity and mutual defense. The Spanish counterattack, alarmed by the growing threat Bayano posed, the Spanish Empire mounted several military campaigns aimed at crushing his rebellion. To the colonial powers, Maroon communities were not just nuisances. They were existential threats to their entire economic structure. Defeat Bayano, and you could stamp out the spark of rebellion. Spanish forces, equipped with firearms, horses, and extensive resources, may have seemed invincible on paper. But the reality on the ground told a different story. Panama's thick jungles turned into a formidable obstacle. Heavy European armor was ill-suited for this environment, and horses were far less effective in dense forest compared to open plains. Meanwhile, Bayano's rebels were adept at blending into the wilderness, appearing and disappearing at will. One Spanish campaign after another failed to capture or eliminate Bayano's group. The more the Spanish tried, the more they had to divert resources and men away from their lucrative enterprises, weakening their overall grasp on the region. Even more dangerous for the Spanish was the possibility of Bayano's success, encouraging other enslaved Africans to rebel. If word spread that a large Maroon community in the jungle was successfully resisting Spanish might, the colonial authorities feared a domino effect across the Americas: negotiation, betrayal, and uncertain fate. After several years of sustained conflict, the Spanish authorities recognized that brute force alone might not be enough to subdue Bayano. They decided on a different strategy: negotiation. They offered him a peace agreement that, at least on the surface, promised autonomy for him and his followers. Perhaps they hoped to lure Bayano out of his jungle fortress and reduce the risk of a perpetual guerrilla war. Bayano, ever the strategist, must have weighed his options. His people were under constant threat. Supplies, although procured through raids and alliances, were precarious. The Spanish seemed willing to talk, and maybe, just maybe, there could be a resolution that allowed his community to survive without further bloodshed. Yet, according to many historical accounts, this peace agreement turned out to be a trap. Bayano was reportedly captured during or after the negotiations, under circumstances that suggest deception by the Spanish. Following this, Bayano was sent to Spain itself. far from the jungles that had become a symbol of his resistance. What happened to Bayano after he arrived in Spain remains a mystery. Some sources claim he lived in quiet captivity, possibly under house arrest or in prison, until his death. Others suggest that the ordeal may have proven fatal shortly after his arrival. Regardless of the exact details, Bayano's story in Panama ended not on the battlefield, but through what many consider an act of treachery, a fate all too common in the annals of colonial history. Bayano's enduring legacy. Despite his eventual capture, Bayano's impact on history remains undeniable. His rebellion stands as a vivid testament to the agency, courage, and humanity of enslaved Africans who refused to accept their subjugation. While popular narratives often reduce enslaved people to the status of victims, figures like Bayano complicate that picture, showcasing how even in the most oppressive environments, resistance was both possible and often successful. Bayano's name lives on in modern-day Panama. A major river, the Bayano River, flows as a constant reminder of his spirit and the legacy of struggle he inspired. Over the centuries, his story has captured the imagination of historians, activists, and descendants of the African diaspora, all of whom see in Bayano a symbol of resilience and determination. Moreover, Bayano's legacy challenges us to rethink the standard story of colonization in the Americas. It wasn't a straightforward tale of European domination. Rather, it was a complex tapestry of clashes, negotiations, rebellions, and unexpected alliances. Maroon communities like Bayano's forced the colonial powers to adapt or negotiate, proving that enslaved people were not merely property, but protagonists in their own right. Reflections on resistance and freedom. Today, Bayano's life story resonates in movements for racial and social justice around the world. His fight for freedom parallels many contemporary struggles, from demands for racial equality to the push for economic and political self-determination among marginalized communities. Indeed, the seed of defiance he planted has blossomed into a broader narrative that spans continents and centuries. For members of the African diaspora, Bayano embodies the fight to reclaim dignity and identity. He reminds us that African resistance did not begin in the 20th or even 19th century. It has deep roots going back to the earliest days of European colonization. By remembering Bayano, we pay homage to generations of freedom fighters who have been systematically overlooked or erased from mainstream histories. His story also underscores the importance of leadership grounded in empathy and shared purpose. Bayano didn't rule by fear or division. He united people from different backgrounds under a common goal: freedom. In the process, he fostered a community where mutual support and solidarity were paramount. This sense of community became the backbone of his successful campaigns against Spanish incursions. Lastly, Bayano challenges us to consider the costs and complexities of rebellion. Resistance is never straightforward. It involves difficult choices, constant vigilance, and the looming threat of betrayal. Bayano's ultimate capture serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of negotiation with duplicitous foes. Yet it also speaks to the bravery required to explore any path that might safeguard one's community, keeping Bayano's flame alive. As we reflect on Bayano's life, let's remember that his story is not just a historical footnote. It's a living narrative that continues to shape discussions about identity, freedom, and resistance. Whether you are in Panama, elsewhere in the Americas, or across the globe, his name stands as a powerful reminder. The desire for freedom can be as unstoppable as a river carving its way through dense jungle. If his legacy tells us anything, it's that courage takes many forms. It can be found in organizing a clandestine rebellion, in standing firm against overwhelming odds, or in forging a community that insists on its right to self-determination. It can also be found in everyday acts of solidarity, where people come together to support one another in the face of injustice. Bayano's relevance today is especially poignant in the context of ongoing efforts to acknowledge and atone for the atrocities of the transatlantic slave trade. Many communities in the Americas are advocating for reparations, historical recognition, and the dismantling of systemic racism. Bayano's tale reinforces that these demands are not new inventions, but the continuation of a centuries-long struggle for dignity and justice. Join the conversation now that you've heard Bayano's story. We want to know your thoughts. What resonates with you the most about his journey? Does it inspire you to learn more about other hidden figures in history who dared to challenge oppressive systems? Let's continue this conversation in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel for more explorations into unsung heroes and pivotal moments in history. Like this video if you found Bayano's story inspiring or enlightening. Share this video with a friend who would be captivated by an underdog's battle against one of the most formidable empires of the 16th century. Remember, history isn't just about what happened. It's about how those events continue to shape our present. By embracing stories like Bayano's, we carry forward the memory of those who fought, sacrificed, and refused to let their spirits be broken. Bayano's name may not be in every textbook, but his significance rings loud in the hearts of those who believe in the power of resistance. May his story remind us that no matter how insurmountable the odds may appear, the human spirit has an incredible capacity to push back. Thank you for watching, and for taking the time to learn about a hero whose name deserves a place among the greatest freedom fighters in history. In honoring Bayano's courage, we also honor the countless others who fought in the shadows, those who refused to let oppression be their destiny. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep searching for the hidden gems of our shared past. We look forward to seeing you in our next video, where we'll continue unearthing stories that challenge, inspire, and redefine what we think we know about history. Until then, let's keep Bayano's legacy alive, because the spirit of freedom knows no boundaries, and neither should our quest to understand it.